So I'm sorry to disappoint, but I'm not going to play guitar poorly in this video. There aren't going to be any audio samples. I'm just going to talk a little bit about this pack that I'm releasing that I'm calling the Multi-Effects Starter Pack. The idea behind it was to create a bunch of, patches that could serve a couple of purposes. The first would be, they're ready presets that you can just plug and play. Maybe you change things around a little bit to suit your needs, but they're, I tried to fine tune them so that they could be things that you could just plug in and go. The other is that they're laid out in such a way that if you are trying to get into the idea of using ZOIA as a multi-effects processor and you aren't quite sure, how to organize things or what sort of modules are useful, I put in some, standard structure to all of them so that they should be easy to follow the signal path. So there are consistent colors used throughout all of the patches. If you see white, like here or here, those are interface modules. In this case, it's an input, an audio input, and in this case, it's one of the stomp switches that's used in the patch. If you see red, that's audio routing. So something like an audio switch, which we have here. And in fact, most of the red modules you'll see will be switches to turn things off and on or to change the signal path from one effect to another. Magenta and aqua are effects or audio processors. So effects like the fuzz that you would find under the effects module section, or audio processors like I use a few bit crushers, or filters that would be found under the audio module menu. Blue is CV. I've purposefully tried to keep CV as little as possible. So there aren't a lot of patches that use CV. Part of that is because, I'm trying to make the signal path as clear as possible. When I patch, I use a lot of CV because it allows me to do things that, you can't do just by using these audio processors or effects. But it's also, something that the idea behind these patches was, here's a basic structure that you can experiment with if you want to, that you can personalize, that you can, throw LFOs all over if you want to, or, toy around with different CV processes and have a framework to do that in. So there's not a lot of CV in these patches, but, the idea is that maybe you add some, modify them, play around with them, use these as structures to explore that side, with having a clear picture of what the audio path is. Green is an exception because green is the expression input, which is an interface module that you would find it under the interface menu. But I wanted to highlight it just to make it easier to see. Now, in the patches where I've put an expression option in all of the patches and I've routed it someplace. But depending on how you want to use the expression, you might need to adjust the connection or adjust the parameter that it's controlling. The parameter as it's set now will be the minimum of your expression sweep, and the maximum will be determined by the strength of the connection between the two. So as you adjust this down, as you move the expression pedal from heel to toe, it will travel across a smaller portion of the parameter. And as you increase this above 100%, you should exceed the maximum position of the parameter. So, that may be something that you have to toy with to see what works best for you. One option might be to change the routing of the expression pedal through some sort of switch. So you could put in an in switch with 2 inputs is how I would do it. And instead of making this connection, we delete that. Sorry, we delete that. I've been told my hands get in the way of a lot of my videos. And I put this in one of the inputs, and then I could use this if I make the connection again, I could use this to bias this input, to bias that. I need to bias this to 0. Sorry. It's easy to forget these things. So if you forget them, don't worry about it. But I bias this to 0, and then I could use this input to set sort of a stable situation. And if I felt like playing around with the expression control, then I could, go back and forth across the spectrum of the expression pedal without having to worry about what this parameter was set to, because I'd be setting it with my expression control. But I didn't want to automatically assume that that's the way you would want to do things, so I'm just putting that out there as an option, as something that I might do if I were playing around with one of these patches. And there are a lot of other ways you could route the expression pedal, but that's just one that I'm going to suggest. Then finally, as you get, those are all the colors up to yellow. As you get into stereo patches, yellow is ganged controls. So, for instance, there is no stereo version of the filter module or the fuzz module, or quite a few modules that you might use. So the yellow controls, they aren't labeled, but they're always on the same page as the parameter that they control. So if you press the output of those, you can trace it back to whatever parameter it controls. And they're a way to modify both the left and right channel of the patch without having to go back and forth and twiddle around and that sort of thing. So, yellow you might see as you come across some of the stereo patches. And so these are consistent through every patch in the pack. There are 10 patches that are mono from the left input to the left output, 0 through 9. There are 10 patches that are mono to stereo from the left input to both outputs, from 10 to 19. And then there are 10 patches that are true stereo, using both inputs and both outputs. And in most cases, except for this last patch at the very end that I put in, which has a lot of reverbs going on, I quite like it. I would suggest, if you like reverb, to check it out. In most cases, there's still a lot of CPU left to play around with. You can obviously delete things and try using different modules than the ones that I've used. You can rip everything out of the structure, and if you just want to use these different controls as ways to set up your own multi-effects needs, pay attention to how they're routed and replicate that for another effect. And if you screw up, you can always just load these up again. That's the nice thing about having them as a pack, a bunch of presets, a bunch of patches that you can just access whenever you want. So, again, I think, a lot of them I really like and may end up expanding on myself and modding myself and turning into, you know, uh, patches that are more like the types of weird, convoluted CV things that I normally do. And, otherwise, that I think they're sort of good frameworks if you want to, build off of them, and modify them and make them your own and do your own weird CV stuff. So that's the starter pack. I hope you like it. Thank you.